Hey everybody, thanks for checking out my video. I set up a new channel to discuss some socio-political things going on in society. I've tried to stay away from this for a little while, but this video that came out, What Are We Doing to White People by Charlie Cheon, I believe it, on his channel, Cheon, who's a Korean gentleman, has got a lot of buzz. It's got 1.2 million views in 2 weeks, a lot of likes, a lot of comments back and forth on it. And I have quite a bit to say on this. I'm going to try to keep this first video short, and I'll may go into some other things. But the bottom line is what he's talking about here is an outgrowth of what is actually cultural Marxism, which is spread throughout society, and the seeds of it began in the 1960s. And this is not any kind of supremacist ideology I'm coming from, or anything like that. I'm not even going to mention some of those words. This is how you get banned from having free speech on social media these days. I am an educated person. I majored in political science in college, full scholarship. I've traveled around the world. I've been to communist countries when communism had just ended. So it's going to take a little bit of background here to explain this, and some of you, may not have the same degrees of knowledge about Marxism, socialism, Maoism, repression, and things like that, and how this relates to what he talks about in this video. Stuff like no one can
But the demographics of the U.S. will have shifted such that white people will no longer constitute the majority.
Continued,
the younger generation you've just seen have graduated from elite schools and hold positions of power in our institutions, our government, corporations.
Insecure. What he goes through in this video is blatant hatred and racism that is accepted, but this has been sort of ingrained and taught to people. And the reason I like the term cultural Marxism is that's actually what it is. And this was sort of created in the 1960s by radicals who wanted to, have violent revolution in the West and put in socialism, authoritarian socialism and communism, things like that. And they specifically said that there's ways to do it that are nonviolent, not through the government, pervaded through society. And the seeds of the 1960s have come full bloom. A lot of it accelerated really after COVID because that gave governments increased power around the world, and they realized it. And it's created what we call like the woke generation. But it's so many facets of society are leading to this. But to some degree, let's just talk about the term cultural Marxism first. And I do want to go into some of my basic thoughts about socialism, Marxism, why it appeals to people, but why it's actually really bad in real life. So the problem is the term cultural Marxism, Wikipedia and others have said that it's a right-wing conspiracy theory and a racist theory. So therefore, they don't even want you to use that term, but that actually is what it is. So an acceptable term that can be used is Marxist cultural analysis, which is really the same thing. And I'll actually I want to talk about the war on words and language fights and things like that, and how data can be manipulated, how numbers. But I'm going to try to keep this video relatively short. So Marxist cultural analysis is sort of what it is, but really it's cultural Marxism. But I've actually tried to get this Wikipedia page edited, and they refused to do it because I do have Wikipedia editing rights, and I'm Jewish myself. I'm not extremely religious, but I am a supporter, of America, the West, Israel, and a variety of things. Western values or advanced free modern cultural values, and that includes in Japan, South Korea, places like that. So for them to say these theories are, purely related to something from the 1920s is wrong. It's like saying just because the Nazis called themselves National Socialists or the Soviet Union was socialist that we can't use the term socialist. They're two separate things. And just because some bad groups appropriate a term for something doesn't mean it doesn't have other meanings. But nonetheless, what this is cultural Marxism. It's spreading Marxist ideology, which is really Maoist ideology, through society from sort of the bottom up. And the educational system is one of the main ways this has happened. It started with university professors. I grew up with one. My dad is a university professor. He is a leftist. My mom is. I was born in Berkeley, California. I understand this mindset. I know it all. I grew up with massive amounts of white guilt. I grew up all of this. I understand it all. And it is so threatening and dangerous for the future of the free, modern, advanced world, any color you are, that it has to be spoken out upon, regardless of whether social media censors it, regardless of whether the major news media ignores it, regardless of whether Hollywood jams every other message down your throat. And now, so it's spread from universities, and now it's all the way down to the elementary school level. The teachers' union is pervaded with it. Students in university who major in journalism are ingrained in it. Every major in college is becoming ingrained with politics that weren't once at all. Geography is taught as politics. Sociopolitics, aka Marxist cultural analysis. My dad, they do it with film studies in college. I know this for a fact. I've taken classes. I understand it all. The problem with this all is it leads to things like Mao's Cultural Revolution. Now, look this up if you want information about it. There's actually not a ton because they burned they burned past history in China when this occurred. And what it was it led to a time of in a communist Marxist country. He basically did a purge. He wanted a purge. He wanted a purifying politically of everybody. So young people were given all the power to overthrow all the old people, put them in re-education camps, to destroy material that they didn't consider, in line with the new politically correct thinking. A lot of people died. People got sent to labor camps. People got sent to prison. A lot of history was wiped out. A lot of actual things were wiped out, cultural things. If you want to look at, for examples of why his video is dead on, I mean, there's so many. I mean, literally, universities discriminate against Asians for university admissions, not just doing affirmative action for certain minority groups. If you check a certain box, which you can just lie in that box anyway, not to mention how many people are of mixed heritage in America nowadays. They literally discriminate against certain groups and in favor of others. That is not anything to do with all men created equal. It's the exact opposite. It's blatantly anti-constitutional. And this ties back into when they talk about woke and when they talk about critical race theory. This is what is the backbone sort of in the educational system of cultural Marxism. Let me just explain a little bit about Marxism and how I view it. So sort of the big picture is that this is like an ongoing takeover, so to speak, an undermining of what I call modern free advanced society. And this is done by an authoritarian Maoist, Marxist, fascist, straight up fascist left. Don't let anybody ever tell you the fascism is only on the right. Fascism is a spectrum with freedom here and it bends around. Fascism here, it meets on the left and the right. One political scientist described it as red fascism, aka communism, meets brown fascism, aka the Nazis, on the opposite side of the band, and they do meet. Fascism is the government telling you what to do, people telling you what to do, people not letting you have your freedom of opinion, and very strict rules and violence to uphold those type things. So when I talk about things like Western, modern, free, advanced societies, I'm not just talking about Europe and North America, and I'm not just talking about white people. I'm talking about places like Japan, Israel, South Korea. I'm talking about the concept of people being able to come to America from all over the world, which my family has, which many families have, of every ethnic group, including nowadays, building something for themselves, getting a better life. Their kids have a better off, their grandkids have a better off, and they become part of the American fabric. They assimilate to some degree, but their pieces of their culture are assimilated into America. That is America. Latinos their culture is a big part of America already. African Americans are a huge part of America. They are Americans. So this breaking up by this and white people and color of your skin is the most opposite thing of peace, love, and harmony and viewing people from a loving perspective. It's disgusting. And it's used to divide for the purposes, cause hatred, cause unrest for the purposes of certain political parties and ultimately for a long-term Marxist revolution. So in advanced free societies, some of the basic important concepts are freedom of speech, freedom to disagree, and some degree of upward financial mobility. Marxism and communism and authoritarian socialism, like this guy Vaush or whoever, all these people, I mean, they're everywhere. They're on Reddit, they're everywhere. It sounds so attractive in concept. So many people in college and before that, including me, are like, man, why don't we just all share everything? Why does everybody have to own anything? Blah, blah, blah. It sounds great in practice Go back and read George Orwell's 1984. Go back and read anything. Look at history. It never works in real life, because what it is one group takes power. No other options are allowed. They transfer all ownership to the state. Everything is run by the state. The experts, the party members, make all the rules. Disagreemers are silenced. A very few elites control everything, and they always become repressive and violent. They're horrible. I've been to a communist country shortly after the Soviet Union collapsed, and it was horrible. Pollution, bleak, no opportunity, no work. People hated their jobs. They would just sit around and do nothing. No goods in the stores. No food. No good food. I can't even tell you. And part of the reason this may be having an upturn now is it's been almost 30 years or whatever since all that happened. The wall fell and all that. In addition to what I mentioned about COVID accelerating things in terms of large companies and governments getting more power and squeezing out the little guy. So it may have been so long ago that people forget, and people don't actually know what happened and how bad it actually was. The Soviet Union was, and life in under the Iron Curtain was for those people. And even back then, because I'm older, I was young, I remember back then that liberals, and I was a Democrat. I always voted Democrat. Nowadays, I vote both political parties. I'm an independent. I remember back then that everybody was like, well, maybe Russia's not that bad. Maybe the Soviet Union's not that bad. It turns out it was actually probably worse, or it was really bad. And the things Stalin did were worse than Mao and almost to the level of Hitler. And a lot of this goes back into where we are now, but I'm just trying to give a little bit of overview. So this socialist, communist, authoritarian dreamland, it's a utopian dreamland where everyone shares everything and everything is equal. It's some kind of agrarian, world where we all grow on farms. There's no factories. We all eat what we make. There was no agrarian past. There is no agrarian past. People had a shorter lifespan when you lived in an all agricultural society. People didn't have goods. They couldn't travel around. They couldn't migrate. They had no upper mobility. Most people were serfs. The vast majority of people are serfs. Farming. It is true that capitalism can be very exploitive with winners and losers. And there's a lot of awful things about it that need regulation. You don't want unfettered capitalism. You don't want monopolies, which we often have, including social media ones with too much power. But again, in reality, implementing and running communism and authoritarian socialism, it's extremely authoritarian, restrictive, and violent. History has shown this time and time again. Marx said all this in his books. It takes a violent revolution to occur. Scapegoats must be made. Guess who the scapegoats are that he's talking about in his video? He's literally, they're literally turning one group into the evil. We're the evil in horror movies now. Everything we smell different. I mean, you saw the comments in those videos and the TikToks. This isn't allowed to be said. Imagine if any other group said about any other group. It's horrible. Imagine if you said it about any other group outwardly. I mean, and felt no repercussions. History is altered. The communists in the Soviet Union did this all the time. They cut people out of pictures. They changed history. That is what's going on now. They're changing history. They're rewriting history. They're focusing on the bad things that happened versus all the good. The bad things are terrible. What happened to Native Americans, colonization largely, and slavery was obviously disgustingly horrible. But that ignores everything else good created in the world, which the vast majority was created by free, modern, advanced societies, generally from the West. Going back to the Greeks, the Romans, Western Europe, and America, as well as Asia to some degree, and other places. So, in a Marxist thing, which is what cultural Marxism is, a non-violent sort of undermining way to ingrain this in, all of this goes on. History altered, traditions broken down. Society destroyed and rebuilt with a new blueprint. These are people who believe the government knows all and should run all.